Welcome, everybody. This is the first episode of Using AI Series 2. After a few months off the air, we are back. Thank goodness you must have been waiting with eager ears, which is a very strange combination of words I didn't think I would say. Does anyone have eager ears? Anyway, I'm Alex Denne, your host, and I'm joined once more by ML research scientist Alex Papadopoulos-Kofiatis and AI startup founder for the very first time, Nitish Mutha. So welcome both.
Hey, Alex, good to be back. Missed you, Alex.
Yeah, and good to join you guys this time.
It was quite funny. Yeah, it's good to have you. It was funny that Alex, Pap, we had so many podcast episodes and so many good chats, and then we stopped doing the podcast, and we were like, oh, we don't talk anymore. So it's nice. It's nice to have a regular meeting back. Really, the podcast is just an excuse for us to spend some time together. It's lovely. But I'm also looking forward to chatting with you, Nitish, as well, very much. So as a little intro to this episode, we are talking about the OpenAI Dev Day that happened yesterday. The release of things like GPT-4 Turbo, which has mixed reviews, I would say, from the Reddit community so far, which is very interesting, but is promising as well and is a lot faster. And we're only weeks away from the anniversary of ChatGPT being released. So if you can believe it, it has not yet been a year since November the 30th, the fabled day when ChatGPT became the fastest growing product of all time. So, I mean, we've been busy too, attending events in the run-up to the UK's AI Safety Summit, and Rafi even claims that he has nudged something higher on Anthropic's roadmap after getting chummy with the CEO after a few glasses of wine. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that when we have him back on. You can watch Using AI on YouTube as well. The link is in the show notes. But let's kick off with the news links. So I don't know which one of you wants to take the first part of the Dev Day announcements and GPT-4 Turbo, because we are users, we're frequent users of GPT-4. I use it a lot as well, and I'd love to hear what you guys think of the announcement, the promise, and whether you've given it a go yet.
So I can take that. Haven't given it a go yet. Looking forward to, as soon as we're done with this podcast recording, I will do that, Alex. So two main things. One, much cheaper compared to GPT-4. So 3 times cheaper price for input tokens, 2 times cheaper price for output tokens. This is great. But even more importantly, huge context size. So from 8K, which was the base GPT-4 model, to 128,000 tokens as a context window. So this is surpassing even Anthropic's Claude 2 model, which has a context size of 100,000 tokens. So this is major because it unlocks new possibilities. You can just put whole documents in there, potentially whole small books in there, and then ask questions on that, operate on that, whereas before it was not possible, right? You had to split it in chunks, you had to do clever things, which sometimes failed. So this is a major development.
I think in addition to that, I think even they're promising high speed or speed improvements, which they will be rolling out very soon. So that is also good news, because especially for us, when we were using GPT-4, we found this, like, the speed of generation for large content was pretty average, and then that will matter a lot for our UX, for our users.
Yeah, hugely. It actually might unblock what has been so far my biggest issue with using GPT-4 for sort of content and marketing within my usual no code, low code Google Sheets sort of workflows, is Google Sheets app scripts have a timeout, and GPT-4 just takes its sweet time. So I have had to use GPT 3.5, or sometimes even reverting to DaVinci 3, which is often better for some tasks, a bit more refined tasks than GPT 3.5 Turbo, I found personally. And this might mean that I can use GPT-4 Turbo in a spreadsheet, but I have to admit, I'm a little skeptical, because 2 days ago, the ChatGPT subreddit, which is massive, right? You've got 3.5 million fans of OpenAI's GPT tools, but basically it's become the go-to place to chat about all the models on the internet. A couple of days ago, people started complaining that GPT-4 had got worse, or that ChatGPT had got worse. And I mean, this was without knowing what was going to be announced at the dev day. So I think it's fascinating that then, as soon as they realized that it's GPT-4 Turbo, everybody said, that's what happened. So I don't think that this model is as good, but they're marketing it as if it is superior to GPT-4. I have a strong suspicion that actually the quality will be less, like I find with DaVinci 3 and GPT 3.5 Turbo.
Maybe that is the reason why they're launching it at a cheaper price, because with extended context size, maybe there is something to lose in terms of quality of output. So I think that's something we want to try and see as well, like what's the quality like in comparison with the original GPT-4. But I imagine, which is why they're keeping price low, so that people try this more and maybe give them more feedback. And with more feedback loop, I think they will get there to improve the quality.
One thing that's quite telling is that they're not actually lowering the price for proper GPT-4, right? So the price for GPT-4 remains the same, and the GPT-4 Turbo has a lower price, which is a reason to curb our enthusiasm, I guess, but need to try it first.
It's like kind of perfect motivation for someone to use GPT-4 Turbo in preview than this.
I'm really curious to know, you two obviously both have great experience in this area. Can you imagine what they've done to create GPT-4 Turbo, perhaps at a slight loss of quality? I know they've it now has information up to April 2023, so this year. It used to be, I think, February 2022, is that right? So it didn't know who'd won the Super Bowl in 2022. Anyway, so it knows more and it's more recent. So there's obviously some slight changes to the original GPT-4 model. I don't know if GPT-4, the non-turbo version, has the updated sort of data set. But I'm trying to understand what they can structurally do that means they can still call it GPT-4, but it's like rapid and cheaper. Are they just making it, also I'm wondering, I'm skeptical here, but are they just making it cheaper to compete with the more competitive models out there? And they're realizing that they need to compete, although they're keeping GPT-4 as a premium version. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd be curious to get your views.
So from a model perspective, there's a lot of things that can be done to optimize the models, right? So there's model distillation, for example, where you could take a big model and then take its knowledge and essentially put it into a smaller model that would then drive costs down and speed up, right? The problem is that we just don't know, because OpenAI is a very closed AI in regards to explaining how their models work. So for GPT-4, we just don't know what the model architecture is. So it's very hard to hypothesize on what they did to come up with GPT-4 Turbo. There were some leaks claiming that GPT-4 is an ensemble model, so it's a lot of smaller models put together, and then you choose which one to go to. So maybe they just reduced the number of the smaller models, but that's just a wild hypothesis, I guess.
Well, I wonder if they can, because a lot of the cost is the inference, right? I wonder if you can track the ensemble models that are used during the inference process, and then sort of start to power down the nodes that aren't that useful. And then is that part of what might have happened with like an ensemble distillation process, right? We could be way off here, but I like hypothesizing about how they might be doing things behind the scenes.
I think doing it on inference wouldn't change much, because they have economies of scale. So they have a lot of users that are using probably all parts of those models. So powering down some parts wouldn't save them in computing costs.
But interesting. So I guess I'm not thinking in terms of computing costs. I'm thinking think about it like this, like say I've published 1,000 blog posts, but after 2 years, only 100 of them ever get read. I just unpublish the 900 that don't get used because that frees up my space to do more things. Is this a similar thing, right? Have they shut down a bunch of sections of, let's call it the brain, that just aren't being used by this massive users, right? So they've basically gone, okay, well, if we want to take out like the weightiest, bulkiest, bloatiest 5% of the model, it's still going to be just as performant at 95%, but it's actually going to be half the size. Or if we look at the cost and we try and make an inference ourselves on how much smaller it might be, I mean, the costs look like, given that it's faster, is it a third of the cost? Yeah, 3 times cheaper. 2 times cheaper for output, 3 times cheaper for input. So perhaps they have halved the size by concentrating on what people are actually using. And they've got a year's worth of good quality data on that now.
Yeah, to me, I think it's like two types of improvement. One is like speed improvement, which is why they call it turbo, or the context. And then second is the context improvement. I think what Alex was saying is like understanding of how exactly they extend the context so largely is probably unknown and probably more secretive. But whereas the speed improvements, I think the ideas you were kind of discussing seems some sort of on those lines, where there could be more engineering optimization techniques in terms of model deployment to make sure the inference happens rapid.
I'm also kind of imagining, like, imagine if you deduped the internet, right? Like, I know that sounds ridiculous, but like you think of all of the information that you bring into one of these foundation models that has these amazing capabilities. I mean, obviously this must happen as part of optimization anyway, but it just gets me thinking. On the context size, I wonder as well if a reduced sort of size of the model or ensemble models or however it's built is what has freed up the ability for this massive improvement in context. And a slight question here is, why is it that, because there must be a structural reason for this. So, I mean, I'm putting you both on the spot here, but why is it that OpenAI's context limits are always like 2 to the power of something, right? Like 32K, 8K, 128K, right? Whereas Anthropic's are 10 to the power of something, 100K, and then they're testing 200K. Actually, that's not 10 to the power of something, but you know what I mean? Like it's divisible by 10. Like, why is that happening? Are these fundamentally structurally different? Like, are they using completely different technologies? And also one, I know you want to answer that, Nitish, and I'm excited to hear the answer. The only other thing, I want to pick up on something that Alex said earlier. After the AI Safety Summit, I believe OpenAI remains the only provider of foundation models that hasn't confirmed that it will open its doors to governments to help them to see how it works under the hood, to increase safety, reduce some of the sort of risks and concerns around these models, because that's one of the main things that came out of that summit. So it's interesting that it's different and it's behind closed doors.
Yeah, just to kind of react to your first question, I don't think so that's anything smarter than just probably preference over both companies. I think as engineers or computer scientists, we always tend to kind of use that binary power, like go from 4K, 8K, 32K, 16K, 32K, 128K. Probably we just love being geek from that perspective. But maybe Anthropic is just trying to do something different with decimal-based ladder. Yeah, I couldn't think of any major reasons to have this or that sort of structure. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it's mostly down to preference and getting used to it, and easy arithmetics for some things. So I'm sure that it matters sometimes for hardware implementation of decoding. But yeah, if I had to guess, I would say that it's mostly down to just preference. We like our round numbers, and round numbers for us are 2, 4, 8, 16, etc.
Actually, there was one point I wanted to mention. Is like, it's funny that OpenAI had a GPT-4 32K version, but which was not released so publicly widely. But they now have 128K version, which they've given it access to everyone. Like, I think just last night I checked, and we have access to it. So I wonder, like, what went there, like why 32K is still not widely available, but 128 is there. I don't know, maybe there is no answer to this, but
it could be that scaling up the context size is very expensive memory wise. GPT-4 is a huge model, and it's very hard to serve it with 32K of context size. But like Alex mentioned before, maybe GPT-4 Turbo is a lot smaller, and maybe to get up to 128, they're doing something different, because it's not enough to brute force it there. So they could be brute forcing 32K for a context size, but have architectural changes for 128K that allows them to serve it much more easily and give access to it to more people.
yeah, I think that could be the reason, like it's kind of complete re-engineered version of the model.
Not necessarily of the whole model itself, they still call it GPT-4, but of the attention mechanism, which is what creates the constraint for context size and what makes the memory scale up the bigger contexts you have. So there's a lot of ways to go around it, and they probably found one that works well and decided to deploy it. Same with Anthropic, because you cannot brute force 100K context size. So they must have some kind of architectural mechanism that allows them to scale up to contexts of that kind of size.
It is so interesting to see how quickly things are changing. It does feel a little bit like a new sort of Moore's law situation. In 3 years' time, we're going to be laughing at 100K context limits, right? Everything's just going to be on a completely different level. But it is very interesting. I mean, we've been talking, excuse me, in terms of tokens. A token is roughly how many characters or words, guys? Do you know off the top of your head? I know there's the tokenizer tool, which I'll put a link to in the show notes, which I use regularly to find out how many tokens my input is.
Depends. It's usually less than a word, but it depends on how common that word is. Some very frequent words are 1 token, others are split into more tokens.
Okay, so
so let's say maybe one word is 1 to 2 tokens.
Yeah, I think a very handy calculation would be like 3/4 of a sentence, of a number of words in a sentence could be approximate token length.
Yeah, so for GPT 3.5 and GPT-4, they say 100 tokens is 75 words. So if we scale that up to what, 32,000, or should we just quickly do a little bit of maths and figure out how many words you can now put in to get a response? I would love to know.
Let's do it.
All right. So while you guys are doing the numbers, some use cases for this I think are really interesting, and I think some of the motivations for OpenAI have been really interesting here. They are definitely trying to focus more on landing enterprise clients. Part of that has come with things like the copyright shield that they announced, which we can go into in a moment. Part of it is to do with the way that they manage enterprise data, and that data enterprises often don't want to go into feeding the models. But I wondered how much of this context limit is what allows them to fine tune. I don't know if that is relevant, because some people just like almost like mini fine tune within a prompt, right? And that's not the way to fine tune. But it seems like this has coincided with them releasing an app store for GPT tools, the copyright shield. I think there's a lot of things. Do you think those things were blocked while the context size was slow? And finally, GPT-4 is too slow, even though it is still regarded as generally one of the best, if not the best out there, in terms of quality of output. But the fact that GPT-4 is too slow for enterprises to use has probably pushed them to think, okay, what is the one thing that we can do that allows enterprise engineers to take the API and build things internally that legal will sign off on. And I think that's probably been a big challenge internally for them, but they've done well with it. All right, hit me with the numbers, and then you can respond to any of those bits. How many words can I put into GPT-4 Turbo as of today on the Genie account as well? It's very exciting.
93,750 words. So let's say 90 to 95,000 words. It's quite a bit. On the other topic you mentioned, I think maybe the long context size was not a blocker for fine-tuning models and offering enterprise things. So I think it's a parallel development. But what might have been a blocker is the size of the model itself. So the bigger the model, the slower and harder and more expensive it is to fine-tune. So if GPT-4 Turbo is actually significantly smaller than GPT-4, which it looks like it might be, then maybe that unlocks fine-tuning possibilities.
Also, they were mentioning yesterday about custom models. So that seems pretty interesting direction itself. How you could build a custom model. I guess it's going to be pretty non-cheap option and pretty only few companies. They would work with few companies, but I think they're kind of opening up their researcher access to those enterprise companies who can then work with OpenAI to build close to large models and for their own businesses with their own data. So that's a good development, I would say, in terms of where things are going with AI.
They even mentioned on the announcement that this option is expensive. That's what they say on the announcement page. So I assume it will be very expensive, not just expensive.
So how many words, remind me? And I want to turn that into pages of a document as well.
Let's say 90,000, Alex.
Okay, so 90,000 words, roughly 500 words a page. So we are talking 180-page documents can be inputted into and get a response. Now, call me a cynic, but I will almost guarantee you that if you input a 180-page document to GPT-4, just because you're so excited and giddy with the news and you realize, like us, that you have access, and you ask it to say, ingest all of my top 100 blog posts, right, that let's say ticks that size category perfectly, and write me a new one, right? I guarantee you it's going to stop halfway through and you're going to have to say, please continue. And then it's going to do it again and you're going to have to say, please continue. I really hope they fixed that issue, because it is my one hang up with GPT-4 that just really bugs me. And Anthropic's Claude is just phenomenal. It just goes. It's just such a sturdy soldier, just like plowing on and completing that prompt in full. But GPT-4 Turbo, if they fixed that, then I'm going to be a very happy man. But that's my one worry.
Alex, there's a chance this was just an issue in the ChatGPT interface. I don't think we've had issues like that with the API version of GPT-4.
Yeah, I think in API you could even raise the timeouts, so keep it a bit more larger. I know there would be some upper limits, but hopefully that should mitigate one of the issue.
Interesting. Yeah, it was within Playground rather than the chat. Well, I suppose that's probably just a facade on the chat interface, isn't it?
On the same lines, I think there is one more topic we could actually talk about is retrieval. So yes, the context length has increased, but there is, let's say, still some sort of upper limit to how much you could put into context. Like in this case, Alex calculated 90,000 words. But you could potentially go beyond that with retrieval techniques, because what you could do is like upload all your documents, and it supports wide range of document formats, like even docx, PDFs, as we know, HTMLs, JSON code. So you could potentially upload all of that into the system, and then the system can smartly do retrieval by its own without any engineering efforts whatsoever. So now that was one of the highlights of yesterday's I think announcement. Like, it takes care of a lot of engineering for you as an application developer. All you have to do is just use API. And in this case, now context length is not the only trade-off you have to make, but you could now upload all your documents, and then it could do retrieval-based augmentation generation on top of it. So what it means is like it can break free from context length and then have more smarter, like vectorize and search, and then find relevant bits and pieces of your find relevant bits and pieces of your documents, and then get you the relevant information in generation. So I think that's a major shift or major upgrade apart from just context length.
This was something already possible to build yourself, right? But now OpenAI offer it as an API, and it feels like they're offering more and more things as an API and building this this app-like ecosystem of AI services,
which is really great for like application developers, because now you have access to all the AI, not just AI, but a good API which takes care of a lot of clever and difficult stuff out of the box. And all you have to do is just plug in the API.
And one of the things that they, I think, announced and that they were excited about is that the ability to create your own sort of GPT apps, if you like, make this GPT store. But that tends to require like some API communication between like various other applications. And they have built in a JSON validator within the response, which is nice. So it won't be like, oh, you ask it for a prompt, or you get the prompt from the user for the application, like your GPT, let's say, and it knows that in order to deliver it to where it needs to go, it needs to format it as JSON. So it delivers that, but actually that hasn't been validated. So the fact that they have built that in obviously must have been a major issue for a lot of people trying to do this. Who knows how well it works, but it does feel like they've gone very developer friendly. They are really, really trying to push the Apple model of innovation and progress, and trying to own a new market with the GPT store. However, Apple was so far ahead, whereas I think OpenAI aren't actually as far ahead as their competitors. So it'll be interesting to see, excuse me again, just how much traction their GPT store gets compared to other sort of foundation model APIs.
Also, they already had a store for GPT applications, not as full-fledged as now this assistance thing, but they already had a store, and I don't think that gained much traction.
No, you had a few people loving things like Code Interpreter for data analysis and various sort of like add-ons.
That was not even part of the store. That was
so that was separate.
That was an OpenAI integration, but it was not a third-party integration. I completely agree. I love that. It was one of my most used ChatGPT features, the Code Interpreter. But it's a built-in, not built-in, but it's an OpenAI plugin rather than a third-party developed plugin. There were a lot of third-party plugins as well, but I don't think that any of them gained traction, or that the plugin store gained traction. Maybe this time it will be different, but
yeah, I was thinking about that. Like the plugin didn't go that viral as other features on OpenAI.
Well, anything else that you guys want to bring up before maybe we round off this episode? I think there's more that we can talk about. GPT-4 Turbo Vision, DALL-E 3. I believe there's a new Whisper model. We can talk about those perhaps in the next episode after giving them a bit of a try, because there were some really juicy announcements, and there's also some great announcements from other providers recently. And we haven't even debriefed about the Safety Summit, so lots to catch up on.
I think that for me, maybe it was not the flashiest announcement, but for me, the biggest announcement out of yesterday was actually the GPT-4 Vision API model. I think that unlocks a ton of new potential applications and thin or thick layers on top of GPT that we'll start seeing in the next few months. I was not expecting API access so soon after they released the model. But that's generally the thing I'm most excited by, maybe rivaled by the context size of 128, because that's very useful for us. But yeah, maybe we ran out of time to discuss this today, but would be great to discuss it in a future episode.
There must be many applications of that. I'm just going through the documentation and the guide for Vision, GPT-4 Vision, so I'll pop that in the notes as well. It doesn't look that expensive. If you want to put, say, a 4K image in there, it's equivalent to sort of 1,100 tokens, which is not too bad, really. Yeah, very interesting to think about the ways that it could be used. There's lots of suggestions of medical images and things like that, which is obviously one of the heralded benefits of AI in healthcare. I would love to be able to just, well, I tell you what, best way to put this is I cannot wait to see all of the tools that use this, because I already use some AI vision tools and they're great, but the fact that the bar was so high for those tools, and with tools like this, suddenly the bar has been lowered and anyone with an idea can just plug into the API and go. Exciting times. All right, well, let's round it up there. Very exciting. Lovely chatting with you guys, and next week I imagine we'll pick up a little bit where we left off with some of the topics we've touched on but not dived into. Who knows, maybe we will even try Elon's Grok tool. I'm looking forward to a sarcastic, sassy, very rude AI, actually, although I think it is partly Elon's just marketing genius as usual. Much as I hate to see it, he does it well. All right, until next time. See you, folks.